Hello and welcome to Seattle City Makers. I'm your host, Jon Scholes. Well, happy September, everybody. The best month, my favorite month in the city of Seattle. The weather, for the most part, has just been phenomenal all of September, although it took a little turn the end of this month. And sports. We just have an abundance of sports. We're spoiled in this town with all the great sports that converge in the months of September and October. Our Mariners are still in the hunt. The Huskies are looking phenomenal. Hockey's back, at least preseason hockey's back. We are just spoiled. I love this month. There's nowhere I'd rather be in September than in Seattle. So hope you're enjoying the start of fall as well. And welcome to our latest episode where I'm joined by Joy Shigaki, the president and CEO of Friends of Waterfront Seattle. If you're not familiar with Friends, they are the nonprofit that was founded in 2014 to oversee the fundraising and programming for Seattle's soon-to-open 20-acre public park on the shores of downtown. Joy's a fourth-generation Seattle native who grew up working and recreating in Seattle's park system. Prior to taking the helm at Friends of Waterfront Seattle, Joy has had an impressive 25-year career working on both coasts, both in New York and more recently in the Bay Area, raising money for civic projects and park projects. She led the fundraising for Golden Gate National Park Conservancy's project in San Francisco, raising $98 million for a campaign to develop the Presidio tunnel tops. And before she left Seattle about 15 years ago, she managed the capital campaign to create a permanent home for Wing Luke Museum in the Chinatown International District. Now we're grateful that she is lending her talents to a generational move on our waterfront to raise nearly $200 million to complete the Waterfront Park project and then lead the programming of the incredible public spaces that will be soon open in the summer of 2025. Joy and I discussed the current status of the Waterfront project. So if you haven't been to the shores of downtown Seattle and checked it out lately, Joy will give you a little bit of a tour of the current status and the phases that are complete and what's to come. We talk about that and the exciting recent announcement and commitment of $45 million by Melinda French Gates and Mackenzie Scott and Barry Diller to extend the project up north from Pier 62 through the Sculpture Park and into Myrtle Edwards Park and Centennial Park, and what that will mean for this incredible urban waterfront experience that will stretch from Smith Cove all the way down to Pioneer Square. And we talk about this project and what it means for the transformation of downtown Seattle and its revitalization as we continue to emerge from the pandemic. And of course, one of our standard questions on the podcast, we get Joy's itinerary for her perfect Saturday in the city of Seattle. Hope you enjoy my conversation with Joy Shigaki, the president and CEO of Friends of Waterfront Seattle. Well, thank you for making time for this and allowing us to reschedule.
Thanks for the invitation. Well, no,
I
told you initially, I was like, I don't feel like I'm a city maker yet. I don't really deserve to be in the category.
You certainly are. Well. And we're in your beautiful new space, which I hadn't been in yet.
Welcome. I know, isn't it stunning?
Pier 56.
56.
Yeah, I went to the wrong one, and so now I got to remember where I am. But above Methune's great space here.
Yeah,
right
they did all the redesign, so we sort of feel grateful to be in a beautifully designed space that's theirs.
You're kind of on the 50-yard line of your project.
Yes.
Does that feel that way?
Well, we always had a vision to be able to be on the actual shadow of the former viaduct and the future park. So it happened much faster than we had intended. We were looking at space. Well, first of all, we didn't know if we could afford what was down here.
Yeah.
And then it became pretty apparent there was something down here, and we moved quickly. So we moved here at the end of June. And it's been fun to actually be down here.
How have people adapted to the space? And
had you been to our space in person in Washington? Yeah. It was much smaller, a little bit more intimate. I like the vibe there, but we just didn't have enough space to come out.
You have a few more people now.
We do.
How big are you?
We're about 35 people.
Yeah.
And then additional seasonal. So we did not have enough space for people to fit in our meetings and enough desk space. But we also felt that it was important if we could find space to actually be together.
Yeah.
Well, you did a great job. Is fun.
This is spectacular. I don't know who wouldn't want to come and work in this office.
Yeah. And then
especially on a sunny day like we have now,
which is pretty. The Seattle Center team is also here. So they're temporarily here, the ESU officers and the maintenance team. So that's been important in building our partnership together and having them with us.
I saw them out on the street, which was cool. It's just like every day that goes by, it feels like this project is more and more real and happening.
Getting closer to opening.
So for those that haven't been down to the waterfront in some time,
sure.
maybe paint a picture for us of like what's happening, the status, what we see today, and then we'll talk in a bit about kind of what's coming and sort of major milestones. But paint the picture for the Seattleite that maybe hasn't visited the waterfront recently.
Sure. Well, I returned after a year, so I missed the 12 years of construction. I think a lot of people just knew the roads were moving around a lot. It was very difficult to navigate. But what you're seeing now is everything is coming above ground, and you're beginning to actually see the shape of the park. And that's part of the audacity of a project that was this visionary, is it just was going to take a long time to get there. So what you're seeing on the 20-acre park from the very southern end is the two southern ends of the park, Stadium Plaza and Railroad Way, are opening this fall. That's butting up against our stadium district, which is really getting people excited who are going to games or coming from games or going to concerts of big names that we know. And those will be coming formally online, but you're seeing the contours of that now this fall. What also happened this summer was Pioneer Square Habitat Beach opened. So as a big part, as you may remember, since I wasn't here in the design phase, was people wanted to be able to touch the water and have an experience with the Sailor Sea. And the beach was opened in time for All-Star Game in July. And it's been this really, really beautiful thing of people coming and having these really quiet moments on the beach. I've actually seen people take off their shoes and wade in the water because the water's so clear.
Yeah, not a lot of downtowns you can do that in, right?
And the water's not that clear, so the combination of factors is a really good thing.
Yeah.
So it's been really amazing to watch that part happen because you can't really have that experience unless you go all the way to Myrtle Edwards and then further by Expedia. So the beach is going to close again because the state's going to put in this beautiful piece of public art to really acknowledge kind of the indigenous history of Ballast Island. And then we're going to do a formal grand opening, the completion of the railing and all of that, along with the public art of that section. And the Washington Street Boat Landing will also open, which will have a small business, a small concessionaire that'll also be under the boat landing, which is beautiful, that black structure. That's an historic monument on
Grab
the
something
waterfront.
to eat or drink while you're
So the hope is that becomes this real natural place for
Yeah.
families to come. You hang out on the beach, you get a drink, maybe get a bite, and it makes you want to gather and stay. And I think we know that people need destinations and sort of know what they can do. That same area, if you've been down here, has two pieces of public art by Buster Simpson that have been installed. There is going to be a formal opening that the city's also leading. I think the main thing is you're starting to see the structure of the promenade, which is nearly a mile. That really is the core of leading people back and forth into the waterfront, but really reconnecting people also back to downtown and neighborhoods. And so you're seeing the shape of the long sort of walkway and how wide it will be. Obviously, you're seeing our beautiful seawall and the glass blocks that are bringing back all the salmon population. And you're seeing the contours of the bike lanes and all of that and how far the road is. So I will say, the plants haven't all been actually planted. The city will be doing that probably in late spring, early fall. But you notice that the road that's been shifted to the east side of the street makes the experience a lot quieter.
Yeah. Yeah, and then there's a lot more landscaping to come. Some
Exactly.
in, which is really great to see the quality of the plantings. And there's been some folks, not a lot, but some who've sort of been critical of, it's just gray and concrete.
I know.
One former mayor who never liked the project to begin with.
That's
not that
right.
we'll pick on him, but
Yes.
But so what's your response to some of that? I mean, it sounds like you've kind of addressed it to a degree of like there's a lot more landscaping to come. We're not done, folks.
Much more to come, and that's right. And I think what people need to come back down and see is that the shape of the park is finally coming to life after 12 years of construction. And it's a pretty hard vision and a sightline to carry a 12-year sightline.
Yeah.
And the conversations of this park began of this replacing of a seawall, then moving the highway and a set of tunnels, and then, by the way, the final completion and funding of the park. That started in 2009. And I think that's the audacity of a city like ours and our citizens to believe that, and residents, that we deserve a park after this massive mid-century infrastructure basically was built in the very heart of our city and really created this massive disconnection. And I haven't been here hadn't been back for a while, so I can understand that real questioning if this thing's gonna happen. Public projects take time and they don't move maybe as fast as people want it. But I'd like to say, though, that they can only happen at this scale when you have that partnership with local government, philanthropy, business. The private-public partnership is really critical.
Yeah, I was doing the math yesterday, and from the beginning of this project to when it will open and be completed, we'll have had 5 mayors.
I know, it's pretty extraordinary. I think it's actually more, because if you include the temporary mayors,
That's right.
For a week
It's more.
or two, I think it's 7.
Yeah.
Is what I've been told.
Yeah. but pretty amazing to see how
Yeah.
this thing's carried through a great recession and a pandemic and multiple changes in the mayor's office and many more in city council chambers.
That's true. It is true.
And then on the northern, as you go north, there's more that people will see. I was blown away by walking down here today, the Overlook Walk and the aquarium, which in some ways is a piece that
it is a huge piece.
Sometimes I forget, oh yeah, we're building a brand new expansion.
Yeah, it's pretty audacious. It's pretty audacious. So the Overlook Walk really will be the $1 million selfie spot. It is an 1 acre elevated part of the park that is this final beautiful connection, an easier connection from the Pike Place Market down to the waterfront. Basically, they built 2 bridges in order to make this thing come to life. So if you're able to drive
for people.
And people, right?
For people, right?
Oh yeah,
Bridges
for people. Exactly. But that's what you actually had to build in order to make this park happen. Yeah. You can have dogs. I think on leashes would be great. And if your cat is in your little backpack, I think that's okay. So you're starting to see the structure of that Overlook Walk, which is at the same height as the former viaduct, to get those incredible 360-degree views.
So the people who wanted to save the viaduct for the view,
you can still see it. So even if you weren't driving north on the viaduct, which we all loved, and you wanted to get in the left lane to see the views, you can do it more safely now because you can stand and sit, have a cup of coffee, right? Bring your kids to the play area. And so the contours of that is stunning, and it's been really interesting to talk to the construction team about what it's meant and how complex it's been to develop this thing. And I will say that, I mean, I don't say this to be flip. It is a really beautiful structure, and there's no right angles of the entire Overlook Walk.
Did the slides make the final design? Do you know?
Not the long. Apparently, there's a really long slide than the original design. It did not make the final design, but there'll be a shorter slide for kids.
The lawyers cut the long slide out?
I don't know if it was the lawyers. It's a great question. Yeah, you just don't want people to get
there's going to be some
on the
slides.
Slide. Yeah, there'll be a small play area at the top for families and a much larger one down on Pier 58. The Ocean Pavilion is in constant change and evolution. It's opening next summer.
So when you talk about expansion, for those not familiar with the
Ocean Pavilion, originally, as you know, was actually looking to be designed over water to be adjacent to the current aquarium. It became very complicated, I think, to make that happen. And there was a ability to look at a pivot to actually design it under the Overlook Walk, which is extraordinary. And it really does bring the best of what Seattle is when you talk about the heart of our city being very much centered around the Pike Place Market, a beautiful institution like the aquarium, Ocean Pavilion, which is really centering international conservation from the Coral Triangle and bringing that locally, and is centered at the middle of the park. So they're finishing up, obviously, their construction next summer. And then you're starting to see what that large area will be. Pier 58, which used to be called Waterfront Park, which I reminded myself a couple months after I'd been here, which is why we weren't called Friends of Waterfront Park until that pier was brought down. And we will be renamed Friends of Waterfront Park as the entirety. But it is basically now kind of a third built. They're doing a lot of the piling, the driving of the pilings now during non-sort of salmon migration season.
And this is the piece that kind of came down.
Yes, they kind of fell into the water.
Fell in the water and then was all taken down, right?
Yeah, and then it fully came down. So that is the pier between what is now the Seattle Aquarium and Miners Landing. And it'll be an active space for programming, this large aquatic theme, play area for kids.
This is that massive one that's kind of like right on the edge of the water. Right?
It's got a triangular shape, and it'll be butted up right against Miners Landing, Pier 57. And that begins to open up this really large central gathering space of the park. You have open space there. You have some additional beautiful public art. The public restrooms will be there. The connection back to the Union Street walkway that's been open since December, that easier walk up to Pike Place Market. And then if you walk further north, then you obviously will bump into Pier 62, which has been the pier that's been open since the fall of 2020, the height of pandemic. But the last 2 years in particular, our team really has been programming that space in partnership and in co-design and co-curation with community. And that's part of the placemaking. You know, you can build a place and just assume people will come. It's that whole, what was the name of the movie that...
Field of Dreams.
Field of Dreams, right? Yeah. So I think that's a really terrible, when you talk about public space, actually, because people who know and feel safe and belonging in space will come. But if we really want it to be a place for everyone in the city to really feel that sense of safety and connection and joy and belonging, then you create relevant programming and you move in the in the sort of at the pace of trust with community to make sure that we are representing the spaces that particularly Black and Indigenous, but particularly BIPOC communities can feel that, but that it's a reflection of our whole community. So anyone who comes in that space will say, this is the magic of Seattle, because we value what it means for everyone to feel that sense of belonging in a place that's as extraordinary as Waterfront Park.
You all have been super intentional about that, and I think had great success in inviting folks down and listening to folks around the programming you are producing that maybe weren't spending as much time in downtown public spaces before. What were some of the highlights of this summer from your perspective of some of the, on Pier 62, some of the programming and events that you all
there've been so many. I mean, the joy of both coming out of the winter, which was very long for me personally, has been like the sun finally did come out in July. I was like, okay, there is a summer month. I just wasn't sure about it for a long time. It's not just the most beautiful time of, I mean, it is a stunning season in Seattle, and I remember now why people want to move here and be here. And they're fooled by our short summer. But it is stunning to be on the water, and our programs are incredible. So let's see, last weekend we had an event called Tide Lines to Timelines, and it was beginning to tell the stories of the waterfront. We know there's a lot of incredible stories that the public knows, but there's a lot of untold stories, many stories that are also stories of a lot of hardship and violence and harm of our city. That is our story. So we had people coming to tell our stories on the waterfront. We worked in partnership with Wanawari, the Wing Luke Museum, the Black Historical Society, to be able to elevate many of the stories that haven't been told, but also pull a lot of those stories, audio and video, and written stories and stories of labor that are both on our website, but was an amazing thing to see people come and actually do that in a public space. And what a joy to do that, but also what an amazing thing, because when you tell your own story and people hear it, it actually reminds us who belongs in a place, and it's kind of our humanity. So that was a small gathering, but a great example of that'll be a continual piece in the heart of our work and the work of Friends. Hip Hop 50th was a big event that happened on the pier. And that's always a partnership with a lot of different artists and curators and folks that help to create basically a full day between fashion, performances, vendors, that brought a lot of joy and brought people from all over the county, people who love hip hop, but also people who've been part of the texture of the evolution of hip hop here in Seattle. And I talk to families. We do a welcome table for a lot of our big events, and it's an opportunity to talk about the park and ask people about their experience. We do a park experience survey. I talk to people who just said, I came from, Kent, or I came from like maybe as far north as like Shoreland or even further north. And we wanted to come down here for the day because this is a place that we've always loved, and to just enjoy being in community. And we've been, now we're rediscovering the waterfront. We went to the Pike Place Market. Wow, this is something really different. We're going to come back. We also had a block party at the end of, I'm trying to think of where we are now. So maybe that happened
a couple weeks ago, right?
A few weeks ago. We had activations all along the waterfront. The sculpture park had some activity. The Seattle Aquarium. We had some activation down in Occidental, which was fun, and working with you all and bringing this sort of hip hop container of art and some really cool pieces done by local artists, by Vivid Arts Collective.
The shipping container,
The shipping container, which was very cool.
Yeah.
And work with you all to make sure that could happen down there, and then had all this great activation on the pier. And people were waiting to get onto the pier at 4:00. And it was this amazing reminder of how people are finding this place and are connecting to it to the rest of our downtown.
Yeah.
And gathered and hung out, had a drink, sat, listened to music, and we're just together because that's what public space needs to be. So there's been plenty of events. And then there's the small events of, this small Northwest Tap group of young people there's about 200 young people that are part of Northwest Tap. And they bring young people in to learn the art of tap, but it's also about wraparound skills, of life skills, of leadership, of
tap dancing.
Tap dancing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was a small pop-up on a Thursday. That was our spotlight series. But we bring young people. We bring people who, maybe are a little bit older. There's an intergenerational component that you don't always see in spaces. And then you also see people who just enjoy the pier every day and come down and just sit and have lunch, or visitors who are coming from cruise ships and just are like, wow, the city's kind of incredible. So I'm just really proud of our team. I don't take any of the credit. I mean, I just come and witness and meet folks and thank partners for their trust in us. and what we're building together in the city, and remind them to come back and to continue to come back downtown and to tell people about what's really changing down here, and a way to really rediscover the waterfront. I think for all of us who grew up here, or if you've been here a long time, it's a rediscover this place that is for locals. The visitors are going to come because it's extraordinary. We're an amazing place to visit, but for locals to come back and have a new experience, I think is what's going to be the joy of all the new people that are going to come back when the park opens in its entirety.
I couldn't agree more. It's just like it's going to be a huge invitation, and already is, even though it's not fully complete. A huge invitation for people in this region that maybe haven't been downtown since the pandemic or weren't coming that often before it to come back. And I think they're going to be blown away.
Yeah.
You've worked on both coasts and I know have studied parks and public spaces around North America. When this is done in the summer of 2025, how do you think it ranks against some of the other great urban waterfront parks? Do you think there's a comparable to what we're going to have when this is all said and done?
It's a good question. I'm just biased on the programs, the projects that I've worked on. I think what's beautiful about the reclaiming of new urban parks, of old infrastructure, an old viaduct, or in the case on the Presidio tunnel tops that I worked on in San Francisco, was tearing down their old double-decker highway, which was called Doyle Drive, and opening up those views and building a set of tunnels and building a park on top. It's how do you create the best of that space and enhance the beauty of that location? That's true to that place. So when I lived in Brooklyn and lived in New York for 10 years, the High Line came online in 2007, and there'd been many years of conversation about reclaiming that elevated highway, or that elevated sort of the railway. And I lived in Brooklyn, and Brooklyn Bridge Park was also coming online because people are reclaiming old industrial spaces also along rivers and along waterfronts. And I think more than anything else, it's you design spaces for how locals want to use a place and bring the beauty of that forward. I think the waterfront's interesting in part because I grew up too, like knowing that the viaduct was there, and you condition yourself to live around it. So you parked underneath it, you dealt with the noise, you dealt with the fact it was ugly because you just adjusted to it, because as humans, we adjust to design. And this larger question of what does urban design look like? Is it really designed for function, or is it really designed for people? And joy. And joy. And
joy and joy.
And joy. And me. And I think that we know that design during those periods of times also had massive negative harms for community when they, put I-5 through the Chinatown International District, and urban design decisions were made that actually displaced people. There's a lot of harm built around those things, but when you reclaim that in a really different way, you're making a statement as a city. So to your original question, I think the audacious nature of what it took to get Seattle to get there is amazing, and is a statement of our values and a statement that the waterfront belongs to everyone in the city. And I think I've actually, when you had an interview with Marshall, I'm such a nerd, I've listened to a lot of your interviews.
Thank you. We appreciate
not
it.
just to prepare for this, but it's like kind of my coming back to Seattle and reminding myself who are all these great people in this town who are doing really amazing things, because I'm coming in at a later point. I have a lot to learn, and you stand on the shoulders of people who've been doing this for a long time. The Embarcadero had an Embarcadero highway, and I think that I had seen it as a kid when we went to San Francisco, but it was literally along the waterfront too, and it was torn down in the early 90s. They didn't build a park; they built a roadway, and it's still beautiful. I mean, I spent a lot of time down there when I lived in the Bay Area, but it was audacious for this city and for residents to say we want to build a park. And that means that you're embedding the beauty of nature and places for people to play and gather in a public space, in a really extraordinary, expanded public park, to enjoy the best of this city. Because you have businesses, it is connected to downtown, the market, Pioneer Square, right? The Salish Sea, connection points to the ferry system, to Kitsap. It's the core of our city and the heart of this region. And I have a lot of just respect for what that meant for that decision. Now, it's been complicated. It's taken a long time. There's been a lot of, Dorothy got stuck for 2 years. People were probably wondering
about that,
if things were going to happen.
Yeah.
It's a concrete strike. And then the complexity of funding and a lot of questions of, can the city finally deliver on this project? And the sightline's clear, it's going to happen. So I like to say good things are worth the wait. And even if government doesn't move as quickly as maybe we want it to, these large civic projects have to happen in public-private partnership. So I'm biased. I think it's going to be pretty extraordinary. But when you visit urban parks that are happening across the country, I think what you experience is that they're true to those places.
Yeah. You couldn't do this somewhere else.
And I think that that's what you're seeing all over, between the Underline in Miami, the Beltline in Atlanta. Millennium Park has been around for a really long time as another example, right? Central Park, Brooklyn Bridge Park, Prospect Park, many of these places have been around for a long time. But the movement of new urban spaces are reclaiming oftentimes of downtowns and ways to recognize that we want to bring people together in a different way.
And it feels like what we're doing here. I mean, this space for so long was about getting somewhere else. Like, when the railroad lines were here,
totally.
and it was like passing through. And then it was when, the ships were here, and you get on the ships to go to the gold rush in Alaska to see if you can make some money. And it was, you come here to kind of get somewhere else. And then we built a double-decker viaduct that didn't even have on or off ramps to get into downtown when it was originally built, or out of downtown. It was always just like,
I think there was one exit though. Wasn't there one exit on Madison?
Originally, I don't know. Originally, I think it was built with no on and off ramps. It was an entirely a bypass. And
People though to remember how it was in Say Anything.
Right.
That's the marker. It's like, okay, the viaduct is really close to the U District because that was the next shot.
Yeah.
Right? Anyway, I always thought that was funny.
But this space is always about like, come here to go somewhere else.
Yeah.
And now it's about come here to be here.
Yeah.
And that feels like the big move. And I think we're getting the best, in my opinion, of a little bit of Stanley Park where you can touch the beach, and a little bit of the High Line with the overlook of being a lookout, a little bit of Brooklyn Bridge Park, a little bit of the Embarcadero, and a lot of Seattle's unique approach to this design. But I'm biased too. I don't think there is a comparable. And the original conversation was always about, this is going to be like what they did in San Francisco or the Rose Kennedy Greenway in Boston. And no offense to those places, but
lovely.
This feels like at such another level.
And it came at the right time. I mean, I just, I guess earthquakes really help to kind of push that along. And sometimes maybe that's what's needed, because that was the same case with Doyle Drive. That was because of their 89 earthquake that they had an opportunity to re-envision.
It's hard to believe that earthquake that we had here was 22 years ago.
Oh my gosh. I was working for the county then, and I was in an old county building right by the old Kingdom. Well, it wasn't, I guess the Kingdom wasn't there. And it was a 2-story.
Or came down that same
Did it come
year,
down
I think,
in 2001?
Right? Yeah, right around
Did
there.
it really?
01.
I remember when it did come down. Yeah, it was bad. And and then it was like, wow, the seawall was damaged, and there's a lot that happened since then.
And then if this wasn't all good enough and wonderful of what's happening between 62 and Pioneer Square, a couple weeks ago, you participated in an announcement with Melinda French Gates and others around $45 million to do even more work and improvements north of 62 to the Expedia campus, Smith Cove. What do you make of that gift and that move and how it relates to what's happening with the current scope of the Waterfront project? And then what does it mean for Friends of Waterfront Seattle?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's great that the DSA is involved in that effort. I think it was an incredible moment of a reminder of how important this waterfront is, and the connectivity of the historic Waterfront Park, which is the largest public project of this scale, and to find this really incredible connectivity for people to continue the experience from the northern end, which is 62 north. So it'll be a much easier, as you know, bike passage on the east side of Alaskan Way and pedestrian passage to the Sculpture Garden, north through Myrtle Edwards, and then through Centennial Park that's adjacent to Expedia. And I think it's important for local philanthropists to put a stake in their ground to say this city matters, and we will make this happen with private philanthropy. And as part of the importance of this new commitment is the commitment back to the Campaign for Waterfront Park, which is Friends' work, right? And so we really appreciate just sort of because it builds confidence in local philanthropy, and particularly, female philanthropists stating their real belief in this town.
You should give Mackenzie Scott a shout out
Gotta
too.
give a big shout out.
Yeah.
It's a big deal.
Yeah.
And we're really grateful for that. And I know some of that may have been a kind of a nod to a lot of the equity work she gives, and her team obviously gives very generously and are very quiet about how they make their decisions. So this larger commitment to continuity of an experience from Waterfront Park North, I mean, people are going to just have an extraordinary time being able to enjoy that. And congratulations to the DSA for being part of it, and thank you for taking this role on too.
Yeah, thanks to them. And I found that some folks in the community public thought that their gift was to further advance solely the existing Waterfront Park project, but missed that it's to extend the scope up to Myrtle Edwards. And so there's some maybe education we still have left to do of like, no, we're getting more.
Yeah, we are getting more.
And that's a huge deal, because the project was originally scoped really ended at Pier 62 and left a little bit of void between there and the sculpture park.
So we want to let people know that the Gates Foundation grant is a challenge grant.
Yes.
So we're being given an opportunity to really invite people in to really help us meet that $10 million match. So we have until next spring to be able to do that. And that's an extraordinary opportunity for us to be able to have conversations that we maybe have had early on in the year and people weren't really ready to pick those up. And we have a lot more people stepping in with giving. And I think it's really helped just to kind of infuse that confidence in both in the project and in Friends of Waterfront Seattle, and saying to folks, hey, we're in the last stretch of this campaign, and we are the nonprofit that's going to be the leader that will continue to help manage and care for this place and programming it, and make sure that we maintain it at the level it needs to be for all visitors, and ensure that it's also safe in our operating partnership with the Seattle Center. So all of this is happening very quickly after this longer sightline of early beginning of the build. So we're thrilled.
And you've raised money for parks and major civic projects here with the work you did around Wing Luke and Bay Area, New York. What's different in Seattle, or is it different in the approach you have to take in trying to raise significant private philanthropic dollars for efforts like this?
That's a great question. I mean, I think I had the most amount to learn because I came back. So you need to build relationships and trust.
You were gone for what, 10 years?
15 years.
15.
Yeah. Because fundraising at its core, as you can appreciate, it's relationships and it's trust building, right? You want to build a level of trust with potential donors to your organization and your work. And there's no one path to get there. But I think the reason I've been in part of large campaigns and big projects is I love the invitation into really extraordinary moments, right? The Wing Luke Museum was moving from this small, what was a former auto garage on 7th Avenue to a new permanent home, which was an historic building in the Chinatown International District. And it was pretty audacious. Like I had actually finished this job. I actually worked for the Howard Dean campaign, my shortest job ever, because he lost the caucus. So I think I was like, did I lose my job now?
How does this work?
How does this work? So then 2 days after that, some friends were like, we feel really bad. You had this job for 7 weeks. I think you might have a job at the museum. So I show up at a meeting with Ron Chu, who was then the director, and Beth Takakawa, both, who's the associate director. And I was interviewing apparently for the job for the campaign manager. And I said, I've never raised any money. How do you think I can do this job? Like, oh, the community, blah, blah, blah. You care about the museum. It's about relationships. It's about strategy. And it's about how you carry the vision and the mission forward. And it's the reminder that you have to connect people to mission and connect people at the time and the pace that people are ready for it. And you have to be a little audacious too. I think fundraisers, well, I would say this. Good fundraisers are pretty audacious. I think we're creative and you provide the big vision, but you also answer the hard questions that people want. They want data. You give them the quantitative, you give them the qualitative. So I think all those things apply in fundraising. But
whether you're here or the Bay Area or New York. Yeah.
When I moved to New York, though, it was kind of funny. My first job there, my former executive director, it took forever to make a decision. I was like on interview 6. And it turns out later because they had made a hire that was bad from out of town. And I had said, hey, listen, at some point you just need to make up your mind. And I said it probably a little bit more graciously than that, but I really was like, who else do I need to meet that I haven't met with yet? I think I've met with half the staff.
Yeah. They're putting you through the ringer.
His joke was that, you came from Seattle and we don't know if you could cut it. And my comment to him was, well, we're more than a 2-horse town. So I'll tell you that, right?
Our little fishing village has evolved.
Exactly. I just thought, God, what do you think we do
That
there?
New York arrogance.
Yeah. It was a little bit of New York arrogance. And then it's a little bit like, you keep your head down and you learn how to navigate kind of the ecosystem. And fundraising is an interesting place to navigate ecosystems. Mm-hmm. That's also why I actually kind of enjoy it. It's relationships. It's where the connections are, how you make new connections to people, how you bring more people in. Fundraising, by the way, is a team sport. If anyone tells you they did it all themselves, they're lying. I mean, because there's so many people who are part of being able to deliver on something which ends up being eventually someone to decide to give to something, right? And it's a marathon job too. Well, campaigns are marathon jobs, but fundraising is a team sport. So you have to be the person that brings out the best in people on your board, on your staff, volunteers, people who tell the story about your project at the city, for example, right? The team at the Office of the Waterfront, your community partners. All of that is part of the texture of a story that you're telling and inviting people into a relationship and a decision for a gift. And so when they finally make the decision, it's the smallest piece of the puzzle. And yes, it's important, but then the cultivation and the stewardship, the thanking of people, and the relationship continues. So I think a lot of it is, I'm a person that just is really curious about a lot of really interesting projects, and I love the big visions of things. And so when you invite people and you're part of something that extraordinary, it's an invitation to create the biggest tent for people to be part of it. And I think as an organizer and a kid who grew up here who was really deeply embedded in community, it's the reminder that the transformation doesn't just happen with the project, is that you really are inviting more people to be in to something really amazing at whatever level that is.
And it's got to give you a good pulse on sort of the consumer or the civic confidence and optimism or cynicism and pessimism in the city, not just the project. And we've gone through a lot as a city, as a downtown, coming out of the pandemic. So how do you peg that meter today relative to a year plus ago when you're out there talking to people about significant gifts in this project that they've got to believe is going to be completed, maintained well, programmed well, and in a city that's healthy, thriving, and revitalizing?
Yeah, I think on one hand, I was in the Bay Area and in Oakland when the pandemic happened. So I was witnessing just really the shifts in San Francisco's downtown and obviously Oakland's downtown, and was here for some of that when I came up to visit. Well, kind of did a little bit of my pod work up in Seattle. I think that, this project has been a relay. So I'm coming in maybe, I don't know if it's the last stretch, but the relay has been happening. And I give a lot of credit for people who've been running the race a really long time, right? Because I'm not the one that's going to finish. I'm going to be one of the many people who are helping to get us to the finish line and beyond, because it's really the vision to what this park will be to the city once it opens. And our sight line is we're looking at 2029, right? Post World Cup, post opening of the Ocean Pavilion, and when it becomes really embedded in an extraordinary way, and how it keeps coming to life for downtown. I think that, for me, coming back at the time that I did, when downtown people are still reckoning with this challenge of public safety, and we began this commitment to our partnership with Seattle Center and really stepping forward in terms of making that financial commitment and being matched by the MPD to make sure that the partnership could happen. I didn't think, it was a little audacious to say that we were part of the revitalization of downtown. I didn't really feel like we could say that. I felt like it was a little bit too ballsy, maybe. I don't know, honestly. And maybe part of it is, I needed to get a sense of where we were downtown and what was happening, and really get a larger view and an understanding about also the hardships that have been faced by businesses downtown and the experience that people have really had that have been very hard. And this texture, as you and I know, of how are we providing a narrative of what downtown's going to become, right? Because we've been through a lot. I don't know if we were talking on earlier about how much pandemic has changed us, like it's changed our rhythms, but it's changed how we want to find places that are safe and find places that we know in a time that was really unpredictable, which was pandemic, right? But what I do know is people need to be together because we're social creatures. I mean, as much as people want to spend time alone, I get it.
Well, and we're lonely right now, according to the Surgeon General.
Oh man, it's dangerous. I agree. And I think those conversations were even happening before pandemic.
Right.
But it only highlighted it because we did it for the right reasons. And I believe that public space, and I think we have an extraordinary city of parks and public spaces, but when you build something so world-class, it's the reminder that we have to bring our city back together really differently and reconnect. And DSA does a lot of programming in public space. I think that we have to have a vision and a narrative, as you know, that downtown's coming back with arts, culture, and entertainment and sports and an extraordinary need to public space. And we need to come back together because this is what happens in cities. And this is why we love cities, is because of the texture of different types of people with different types of experiences and different type of things we can do together that allow us to get there. So, naysayers are naysayers, but, you have to listen, and it's real. The struggle downtown has been real for the business community. It's been real for people who've lived down here and had been really struggling. It's been hard for people who are unhoused and people who have not had the resources they need, and the real desire for additional services and for housing and all the things that we know are really necessary to meet people where they are. So all those things are also true, and it's not a binary. But it's knowing that we need to come back and rediscover parts of our city in a different way and build new rhythms. And I think the park is going to be a big part of that. And hopefully it'll be the surprise that people didn't realize was going to be so magical, right, for our city.
Yeah, it feels like,
You want to remind the listener.
Are you picking that up?
Yeah, so just that we're on a working waterfront.
Oh, let's do it, yeah.
James notes, we are on a working waterfront. If you're picking up the fairy horns and the, what's the ding from? I don't know. But it's
Maybe the Argosy is right here.
yeah, we're next to
Argosy is right
Argosy. And it's got to be helpful to be able to hold out like the vision of what this project is going to be and the values that you speak of, and also point to, and we've made some progress in bringing people back into the downtown, right? We're not where we were 2 years ago. We've made good progress.
And we need to translate, the data that you all pull from the DSA and talking to the Seattle Historic Waterfront businesses. And we need to be aware of the larger ecosystem of downtown because we're a partner in that work with you all, with the business community, with residents, with community organizations. I think that maybe, but I don't know if this is true, but I think that part of it is we need to be understanding the context and be able to speak to that and be able to point to people who know that work and be able to have the data and be able to have the fuller story. Because none of this needs to happen where we're operating in isolation.
Right.
And the work of Friends is so centered in partnership. And I think, if nothing else, to what we were talking about earlier around pandemic, is it maybe it pushed us to be a little bit more intentional about partnership, what it means to be sharing information and looking for shared solution and taking a step back and bringing the right people in the room to have different conversations. And I think in civic life, that's what should be happening anyway.
Yep.
But maybe that pushed all of us to do it more and better and differently.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think we've seen that around big projects like this and then around the big events that have come and are coming, whether it was All-Star Week or Winter Classic or FIFA.
Yeah.
I mean, the collaboration among the sports teams, but also all the other adjacent organizations that have similar objectives. It's that wasn't happening to the same way in recent memory, pre-pandemic.
And you bring out the best in terms of the assets of all of our organizations and individuals, right? I think that it also pushes us on the edges, right? I think that that's where the growth space happens, to do things a little differently and better, or ask ourselves, why are we doing it that way? And maybe, right, in those growth edges, we can actually have a different approach that actually might be more effective, or in the end, build more trust that actually is equally as important, right, in the work that we're doing collectively.
Yeah, and confidence of, hey,
and then the confidence,
we did that
right?
thing. We invited a ton of people here for All-Star Week. They had a great time. Everything went largely well. We know there's some things to improve upon. So we've got a couple of standard questions that you, I hope, are familiar with as a regular listener, as you said, of the podcast. You mentioned your job on the Howard Dean campaign. I don't suppose that was your first job where you took a paycheck. What was your first job?
No, my first job I worked for. My first official job, besides being a babysitter up the street with our neighbor, I worked for Jefferson Community Center as a summer day camp counselor. So that was
for the Parks Department.
For the Parks
that?
Department.
Yeah.
So I was 18 years old, coming back from college. So I went to school in LA, came back and worked as a camp counselor. And there were, so every summer I did that, and then eventually became an associate director and a director. So my sister and I followed that same path. But that was that was kind of an interesting moment of like realizing how incredible our parks department is and bringing people together. And then I later kind of joined onto the Jefferson Community Center Advisory Committee. Yeah.
And you've had Seattle parks in your blood and history.
I know, it really has been. I've loved the parks here.
Yeah. and was a user of many of them, I know, growing up here. And
Yeah. I mean, we saw our community in it. You did the church thing and birthday parties, and my dad played softball, and we all gathered and realized that, I mean, Seattle, first of all, is just a bevy of extraordinary places that to grow up in and really connect back to nature. And then there's a recognition that not everyone has that sense of seeing themselves in those spaces and what that means in terms of safety. So it's this interesting full circle moment when I remembered the day camp thing. And I was sharing that with someone who also worked at day camp and talked about the fact that was a great birth control measure to be taking care of that many children at one time, being as young as we all were, and that parents actually trusted us to take care of their kids 8 hours a day.
They just needed a break.
You know?
They didn't get to trust.
They just were like, we'll see you at 6 o'clock.
So since being back, have you developed a perfect Saturday in Seattle, an itinerary for your perfect Saturday? It's Friday today.
It is Friday today.
Do you have a perfect Saturday yet? Or are you still
that was
curating
the zinger question, because I knew you were going to ask me that.
Yeah.
Because I haven't been here that long. And I struggled in the winter because, Seattleites don't go out.
Yeah.
Like, where is everyone? What's happening?
Hunkering down.
Yeah. But this is where I have to take up a winter sort of, I'm going to take up snowshoeing because I do love it. But now that I came out of winter, it's been really fun to kind of rediscover hiking in the area because it is so stunning here. And I hiked when I was obviously the Bay Area, there's so many places to hike. And actually I hiked a lot in New York. I'm in New Jersey. But it's been fun to reorient myself here. So an ideal morning would be take a really beautiful hike on a Saturday morning, go early, come back. I'm a big breakfast and brunch person, so not necessarily going out, but getting together and having people together and having brunch. And then because Seattleites finally come out in the summer, I don't mean to bang everyone, but I was seriously like, where is everyone? We're going to have programming on the pier, so I'd make a couple hours and stop on the pier and see programming, which is fun, and see our partners and talk to people who visit the waterfront, and then go to a concert outside, in a neighborhood, or go to a street fair, go to Seattle Center for an event. I mean, I love being out and seeing people and sort of understanding the changes that have happened in the city. And then I might wrap it up with kind of a sparkling drink somewhere, because I like kind of rediscovering a lot of the new places that I don't know, new bars and new restaurants. And usually with friends and family. But the job's been kind of rigorous, so depending on the day, I might just go, and I'm usually by water though too. I love water. So I'll be at Alki, or I'll be at Golden Gardens, or be on the waterfront.
Are you finding hikes with trailheads that aren't overrun? You beating the crowds?
It hasn't
going
been terrible.
Early?
I get a lot of tips from friends, and when we go, it's like, what time you have to arrive. So, the combination of doing kind of the North Cascades and even just doing Tiger Mountain because it's close has been fun. But it's actually nice. It's been nice to sort of see how people are using trails, who's out and about, and talking to people, right? Because I think that that's what we've missed.
Yeah.
So it gives me kind of this flavor of what the culture now is of the Northwest, because I've been away for a while.
Well, it sounds like a great Saturday of nature and urban. It's a good mix, which is in some ways what you're helping to deliver here, of this experience where you can look at a national park across the water, as Dan Biederman reminded us when he was a guest not too long ago. And I never really thought of that. I mean, you can actually see 3 if you're really creative, if you can see North Cascades and Mount Rainier and the Olympics. And then you've got the urban right here to enjoy. So we're lucky to have it, and lucky to have you at the helm of Friends of Waterfront Seattle to bring this amazing project over the finish line and hopefully beyond. So thanks for making time, Joy, and for your leadership of the organization and this historic and generational move that we're making in our city.
Thank you.
Well, hope you enjoyed my conversation with Joy. We are lucky to have her at the helm of this incredible transformational project on downtown's waterfront. It is going to be a big deal and a home run, and I think better than expected, and certainly worth the wait. And we've been waiting for quite some time, but 2025, the summer of 2025 is really just around the corner, and it's going to be thrilling to see this thing complete. And then a year later, we'll have World Cup in Seattle to really coronate this incredible new series of public spaces. So you can check out the renderings and maps and other materials and information at friendsofwaterfrontseattle.org. But even better, just get down there for yourself if you haven't been down there recently. And I'd say start from the south in Pioneer Square, where a good portion of the project is complete, and then work your way north. I was down there today, and it was fun to see all that has transpired since I was down there last time. So go check it out for yourself. And thanks again to Joy for joining us. I want to close out, as I do each and every episode, with a recommendation of something you got to just check out in downtown Seattle. And this is more of a tip versus something that is new or recently reopened. And this is a tip I just learned about. But if you are a Seattle Public Library card holder, you can get free admission to 6 major museums in our city, including Mopop and the Seattle Aquarium. All you have to do is go to the spl.org website and find the information there on how you can use your library card to get free admission to 6 different museums within the city, including a number downtown. So it's kind of museum weather now. We're into fall, and if you're looking to get inside and stay warm and go check out interesting arts, culture, and other cool things in our city, use your SPL card to do just that and get free admission. So there's your tip. spl.org for more information. Well, thanks for joining us on this episode of Seattle City Makers, presented by the Downtown Seattle Association, with support from James Cito and production by Spark Creative.